Welcome back, 5th grade, to our next chapter of My Side of the Mountain. So I'm going to read you the chapter in which I met one of my own kind and had a very terrible time getting away. But before I read that to you, I wanted to share with you, because I think it's important for you to know that it's not just kids reading books on this break, and having to read a bunch of chapter books or do different things, but I think it's important for teachers to continue learning and reading as well. So I picked out a new book that I'm going to be reading, and I just started it today, but it's called City of God. I don't know if you can see it. Here it is. City of God, and it's about old New York and how the church kind of affected how New York developed. Because if you didn't know, I was actually born in New York, near Albany, which is the capital of New York, and then I moved to Ohio when I was 5. So there's some Mrs. Boscawen trivia for you. So I'm going to be reading this through the rest of our break, and it's pretty thick, so hopefully I finish it, but it seems really interesting so far. Maybe you can comment below and let me know if you've been reading any chapter books or what you've been reading, just so we can keep in touch. But here is our next chapter. And I also just realized how unflattering this light is. So that's special. But that's okay. That's not what's important. So, in which I meet one of my own kind and have a terrible time getting away. 5 notches into June, my house was done. I could stand in it, lie down in it, and there was room left over for a little stump to sit on. On warm evenings, I would lie on my stomach and look out the door, listening to the frogs and the nighthawks, and hope it would storm so I could crawl into my tree and be dry. I had gotten soaked during the first couple of downpours of May, but now that my house is done, I wanted the chance to sit in my hemlock and watch the cloudburst wet everything but me. Now, this opportunity did not come for a long time, because it was very dry. One morning, I was sitting on the edge of the meadow, and I had cut down a small ash tree and was chopping it into lengths about 18 inches each. This was the beginning of my bed, and I was planning to work on it after supper every night. With the summer golden upon me, food was much easier to get, and I usually had several hours of free time after supper to do other things. I had been eating frogs' legs and turtles, and best of all, an occasional rabbit. My snares and traps were all set now. Furthermore, I had a good supply of cottontail roots that I had dug out in the marsh. Now, if you ever eat cattails, be sure to cook them well. Otherwise, those fibers are tough and chewy, and they're hard to get through like starchy food. But they're more than worth it. However, if you cook them right, they taste just like potatoes. Well, after you've been eating them for a couple weeks. And to my thinking, they're pretty good. Well, anyway, the summer morning when I was gathering material for my bed, I was singing and chopping and playing a game with a raccoon I had come to know. He had just crawled into a hollow tree and had gone to bed for a while when I came into the meadow. From time to time, I would tap on his tree with my axe, and he would sleepily drag his little head out, snarl at me, and close his eyes and slide out of sight. The third time I do this, I knew something was happening in the forest. Instead of closing his eyes, he pricked his little ears up. His face became drawn and tense. His eyes were focused on something down the mountain, so I stood up and looked down too. I could see nothing, so I squatted down and went back to work, and that raccoon dove out of sight. "Now what's got you all excited?" I said, and tried once more to see what he had seen. And then he has another picture in here of his traps and snares. So this one's called a game snare, and it says, "This I can't read what it says. That's why it's important to have good cursive. Maybe this device is set along an animal's runway, and then this one down here says this one will work sometimes too." And it's a little picture of what his snares would look like. So there's like a little rope that would catch the animal, and they have one for each one. That'll catch the animals that he's gonna eat. I finished the post for the bed and was working on a bigger ash tree to fell and make slats for the springs when I nearly jumped out of my shoes. "Now what are you doing all up here alone?" It was a human voice. I swung around and stood face to face with an old lady in a pale blue sunbonnet and loose brown dress. "Oh, gosh," I said, "don't scare me like that. Say just one word." So one word at a time so I get used to a human voice. I must have looked frightened, because she chuckled and smoothed out the front of her dress and whispered, "Are you lost?" "Oh, no, ma'am," I stuttered. "Then a little fellow like you should not be here all alone up at this haunted mountain." "Haunted?" I said. "Yes, indeed. There's an old story that goes that men who come up here to play ninepins right down that gorge in the twilight," and she peered at me. Are you one of them? Oh, no, 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 I said. I read that story, and it's just make-believe. I laughed, and she puckered her forehead. Well, come on, she said. Make use of yourself and help me fill my strawberry basket. I hesitated. She meant my strawberry supply. Now get on with you. A boy your age should be doing something worthwhile instead of playing mumbly-bumbly with peg sticks. Come on, young man. She jogged me into the meadow. We worked quite a while before we said any more. Frankly, I was wondering how to save my precious, precious strawberries. So I picked very slowly. Every time I dropped one in her basket, I thought how good it would taste. Where do you live? I jumped. It was terribly odd to hear a voice after weeks of only listening to the birds and the raccoons, and what's more, to hear a voice ask a question like that. I live here, I said. You mean Delhi? Fine, you can walk me home. Nothing I added did any good. She would not be shaken from her belief that I lived in Delhi. So I let it go. We must have reaped every last strawberry before we stood up. She put her arm in mine and escorted me down the mountain. I certainly could not escape escorting her. Her wiry little arms were like crayfish pinchers. I couldn't have gotten away if I had wanted to. So I walked and I listened. She told me about the local and the world news. It was rather pleasant to hear about the National League, an atomic bomb test, and Mr. Riley's three-legged dog that chased her chickens. Now, in the middle of all this chatter, she said, "That is the best strawberry patch in the entire Catskill Range. I come up here every spring. For 40 years, I come to that meadow for my strawberries. It gets harder and harder every year, but there's no jam that can beat jam from that mountain. I know, I've been around here all my life." And that's when she went right into the New York Yanks without putting in a period. As I helped her across the stream with the big boulders, I heard a cry in the sky. I looked up. Swinging down from the valley on long pointed wings was a large bird. I was struck by the ease and the swiftness of its flight. "That's a duck hawk," she said. "They nest around here every year. My pa used to shoot 'em. He said they killed the chickens, but I don't believe it. The only thing that kills chickens is Mr. Riley's three-legged dog." She tipped and teetered as she crossed the rocks, but kept right on talking and stepping as if she knew no matter what she would get across. Finally, we reached the road. I wasn't listening to her very much anymore. I was thinking about that duck hawk. This bird, I was sure, was the peregrine falcon, the king's hunting bird. I will get one and I will train it to hunt for me, I said to myself. Finally, I got that little lady into her brown house at the edge of town. She turned fiercely to me as I started back. "Now where are you going, young man?" I stopped. Now I thought she was going to march me into town. Into town? Well, that's where I'll go then, I said to myself. And I turned on my heels and I smiled at her and I said, "To the library." So I'm going to read you the next chapter as well, and it's called The King's Provider. Miss Turner, if you remember she was the librarian, was glad to see me. I told her I wanted some books on hawks and falcons, so she located a few, although there was not much had to be had on the subject. We worked all afternoon, though, and I learned a lot. I departed when the library closed. Miss Turner whispered to me as I left, "Sam, you need a haircut." I hadn't seen myself in so long, but this hadn't occurred to me. I don't have any scissors. She thought a minute and got out her library scissors and sat me down the back steps. She did a fine job, so I looked just like any other boy who played hard all day, who, with a little soap and water after supper, would be going off to bed in a regular house. I didn't get back to my tree that night. The May apples were ripe, and I stuffed on those as I went through the woods. They tasted kind of like a sweet banana, a little earthy and very slippery, but I liked them. At the stream, I caught a trout. Everybody thinks trout are harder to catch because of all the fancy gear and fish lines that are sold for trout fishing, but honestly, they're just as easy to catch as any other fish. They have big mouths and snatch and swallow the whole hook if they're hungry. With my wooden hook in its mouth, the trout was all mine. The trouble with trout is that if they're not hungry is when most people have time to fish. I knew that they were hungry that evening because the creek was swirling and the minnows were everywhere jumping out of the water. When you see that, go fish. You'll get them. I made a fire on a flat boulder in the stream and cooked the trout. I did this so I could watch the sky. I wanted to see that falcon again. I also put the trout's head on the hook and dipped it into the pool. A snapping turtle could view a trout head with relish. I waited for that falcon oh so patiently. I didn't have to go anywhere. And after an hour or so, I got rewarded. A slender speck came from the valley and glided above the stream. It was still far away, with its wings folded as it bombed to the earth. I watched. It arose clumsily and big, carrying food, and winged its way back to the valley. I sprinted down the stream and made myself lean to some cliffs where I thought the bird would disappear. Having learned that day that duckhawks prefer to nest in cliffs, I settled for this site. Early the next morning, I got up and dug the tubers out of an arrow leaf that grew along the stream bank. I baked those and boiled some mussels for breakfast. Then I curled up the willow and watched the cliff. The falcons came in from behind me and circled the stream. They had apparently been hunting for food before I'd even gotten up, and now they were returning. This was exciting news. They were feeding young, and I was somewhere near that nest. I watched as one of them swinged into the cliff and disappeared. A few minutes later, I winged out, empty-footed. I mentally marked the spot and said, "Aha!" After splashing across the stream in the shallows, I stood at the bottom of the cliff and wondered how on earth I was going to climb the sheer wall. I wanted a falcon so badly. However, that I dug in with my toes and my hands and I started up. The first part was easy. It wasn't too steep. When I thought I was stuck, I found a little ledge and shined up it. I was high, so high that when I looked down, the stream spun. I decided not to look down anymore. I edged up to another ledge and lay down to catch my breath. I was shaking from exhaustion. I was so tired. I looked up to see how much higher I'd have to go when my hand touched something moist. I pulled it back and I saw what it was. White bird droppings. Then I saw them. Almost where Hannah bent had been 3 fuzzy, whitish gray birds. Their open, wide mouths gave a startled look. "Oh, hello, hello," I said. "You are cute." When I spoke, all 3 blinked at once. All 3 heads turned and followed my hand as I swung it up towards them. All 3 watched my hand with open mouths. They were marvelous. I chuckled, but I couldn't reach them. I wormed forward, then wham! Something hit my shoulder. Oh, it pained. I turned my head to see a big female. She had hit me. She winged out, banked, and started back for another strike. Now I was scared. I was sure she would cut me wide open. With sudden nerve, I stepped forward, and picked up the biggest of the nestlings. The females were bigger than the males. They are the falcons. They are the pride of kings. I tucked her in my sweater, leaned across the cliff, and facing the bullet-like dive of a falcon. I threw my foot out as she struck, and my tennis shoe took the force of her blow. The female was now gathering speed for another attack. And when I say speed, I mean like 50 to 60 miles per hour. I could see myself battered and torn, lying in the valley below, and I said to myself, "Sam Gribley, you better get down from here like a rabbit." So I jumped to the ledge below, found it was really quite wide, slid on the seat of my pants to the next ledge, and stopped. The hawk apparently couldn't count. She didn't know that I had one of her chicks, for she checked her nest, saw the open mouths, and completely forgot about me. She scrambled to the riverbed below, somehow, very careful not to hurt. I scrambled to the riverbed below, being very careful not to hurt the fuzzy, hot body that was against my own. However frightful, as I called her then because of all the difficulties I had getting her, she did not think so gently of me. She dug her talons into my skin to brace herself along the bumpy ride to the ground. I stumbled into the stream, placed her on the nest of buttercups, and I dropped down beside her and fell asleep. When I awoke, my eyes opened to 2 gray eyes and a white, stribbly little head. Small pin feathers were sticking out of her down like feathers of an Indian quiver. The big blue beak curled and snarled up in a smile. "Oh, Frightful, you are a beauty." Frightful fluffed her little feathers and shook. I picked her up in the cup of my hands and held her under my chin. I tucked my nose into the deep, warm fuzz. It smelled dusty and sweet. I liked that bird. Oh, how I liked that bird from the minute I smelled her. She was so pleasant to feel the beating life and see funny little awkward moments of the young thing. The legs pushed out between my fingers, and I gathered them up, together with the thrashing wings, and tucked the bird in one piece under my chin. I rocked. "Frightful, you will enjoy what we're going to do." I washed my bleeding shoulder in the creek, tucked the torn threads of my sweater back into the hole they had come from, and set out for my tree. And that is the end of that chapter. Now, quick side note I want to make about what Sam just did. Taking a bird from the wild is illegal. So if you see one in the wild, it's best, especially something like a falcon or a hawk or an eagle, get an adult to get somebody who they know, like what they know is they're doing, because they can be very dangerous. I mean, if you're just out playing, they're not going to hurt you. But if you find one that's injured or something like that, get an adult, because their sharp talons, their sharp beaks, they're meant to cut because they're hunters. So they're meant to cut flesh. So they really could hurt you. So what Sam did was very dangerous and illegal. So like I said, if you happen to find one in the wild ever that's injured, get an adult to call somebody who knows what they're doing to come get it so that you're not injured. That is the only thing from this book I don't like, is that he does this illegal thing and steals a baby bird from its mama. But It's just a fictional story, so we can learn from his mistakes as well. All right, let me know what you're thinking about the book. We're about a third of the way through it already. So we should be able to finish it as long as I don't miss any more chapters before we go back for school. And then if you do like it, just let me know, because this is actually the first book in a trilogy written by the same author. So let me know if you want to hear more about Sam. All right, I think I'm going to read you 2 more chapters tomorrow as well. So look for another post tomorrow, and have a good night.